ever look at the super successful and wonder, is that just luck? Or is there like a secret formula? Well, today we're going to deconstruct the blueprint of the 1%. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's start with a number that's kind of hard to wrap your head around. By 2025, the world's billionaires, their collective piggy bank hit an insane $18.3 trillion. To put that in perspective, that's bigger than the entire economy of China. The sheer scale of it is just wow. So where is all that money really? Well, check this out. It turns out a tiny, tiny fraction of people, we're talking just 1.6% of adults on the planet, hold almost half of all the world's private wealth. When you see a number like that, you have to ask a pretty big question. Right, so what's the deal? Is this whole thing just a cosmic lottery? A few people hitting the jackpot? Or is there an actual system at play? You know, a set of rules, habits, maybe even some advantages that you could actually learn and maybe even copy? That is the big question we're diving into right now. And here's where it gets really interesting. The answer might surprise you because success, it's not nearly as random as it seems. In fact, in a lot of areas, it follows these predictable, almost mathematical patterns. So let's start there. Let's look at the hidden laws that are quietly deciding who gets to the top. Okay, first up, we've got a classic you've probably heard of, the Pareto principle. You know, the 80-20 rule. The basic idea is that a small number of inputs create most of the outputs. Like in a business, 20% of your customers might bring in 80% of the cash. It's this fundamental rule of, well, things not being equal. But believe it or not, as extreme as that sounds, it gets way, way more intense. And that brings us to something called Price's Law. Now, this one is especially true for things like creative work or engineering. And honestly, it's way more brutal than the 80-20 rule. It says that the square root of the number of people in any given field are responsible for 50% of the results. Yeah, the square root. Just think about that for a second. If you have a big company with, say, 10,000 employees, the square root of that is 100. So Price's Law predicts that just 100 people, that's only 1% of the entire workforce, are creating half of the company's total value. That is an absolutely insane concentration of productivity.
So you might be asking, how does this gap even start? And why does it get bigger and bigger over time? Well, that's explained by something called the Matthew effect. You might know it as cumulative advantage. Basically, it's the classic, the rich get richer idea. You get an early win, right? That gives you more resources, you meet better people, you get more opportunities, which then leads to even bigger wins. It's this powerful feedback loop that just separates the winners from everyone else exponentially.
Okay, so if these invisible math laws are like the landscape, how do the top players actually navigate it? Well, a big study in 2025 called Built Not Born looked at the top 100 self-made billionaires, and what they found was fascinating. These people didn't just stumble into success, they built a system, and it stands on three main pillars.
And here are those three pillars. It's not just about having one genius idea. It's about the whole infrastructure you build around yourself to make that idea happen. We're talking an elite education, this relentless push for radical innovation, and maybe the most important piece of the puzzle, the power of your network. And when you look at the actual data, it's pretty eye-opening. Get this, a whopping 68% of them have an advanced degree, or one from an Ivy League school, which, let's be honest, is a huge incubator for those elite networks. There's also a really strong link between how much wealth someone has and how many companies they've started. And their social circle? That alone can explain about a quarter of the difference in wealth. It's huge.
And this isn't just about money, right? This quote from Oxfam International really hits it home. It reminds us that these same feedback loops that pile up wealth also pile up influence and power. And that creates systems that have really deep, profound consequences for society and politics.
All right, so let's zoom in a bit. We've talked about these big structural advantages, but what about the personal stuff, the daily grind? See, top performers don't just have a better game plan, they have a better operating system. And we're talking about daily habits that can apparently make someone 400, even 800% more productive. That's a game changer. And it all kicks off the second they open their eyes. The best CEOs don't just, have a morning routine. They literally architect the first few hours of their day with military-grade precision. They build what you might call a morning fortress, a way to defend their focus and lock in their energy for the entire day. So what does that actually look like? Well, for starters, most of them are up way before the sun. They make a point to stay off their phones for at least the first 30 minutes. That stops their brain from immediately jumping into reactive email-checking panic mode. And breakfast? It's all about fueling up with high-protein meals to get that sustained brain power, not just a quick sugar rush that leads to a crash. And that super disciplined start? It's the launch pad for the rest of their day. Look, the goal isn't just to work more hours, it's to get more out of the hours you put in. The real enemy for all of us today is distraction, and these folks have some serious weapons to fight it. Here are a few of their go-to tools. You've got time blocking, where you batch all your similar tasks together, like handling all your emails in one specific slot. Then there's the Eisenhower matrix, which is brilliant for figuring out what's actually important versus what's just screaming for your attention. And the payoff for this stuff is massive. Just avoiding one interruption can save you the 23+ minutes it takes your brain to get back on track.
But, the real ultimate productivity hack? It's not about your calendar. It's about upgrading the way you think. The world's absolute best performers don't try to reinvent the wheel every single time they face a problem. They use what are called mental models. These are like proven software for your brain to make better, faster decisions.
Here are 3 of the big ones. First, there's first principles thinking. That's where you break a problem all the way down to its basic, undeniable truths. Then there's inversion, which is so cool. You flip the problem upside down. Instead of asking, how do I succeed? You ask what would absolutely guarantee I fail. And then you just don't do those things. And finally, the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, and act. It's a super fast decision cycle that's perfect for when things are chaotic. So let's recap. We've got these huge mathematical forces, we've got these structural pillars of success, and we've got these elite daily habits. The big question now is, what do we do with all this? How do we bridge that gap and actually apply the stuff to our own lives? It really comes down to focusing on your own personal return on individual. But hang on, before we jump into the takeaways, we have to tackle a really important question. We've just laid out this whole blueprint, right? But is success really just about following the steps? Can it all be boiled down to skill? And the honest answer is no. The hard truth is we all fall for this trap called survivorship bias. We study the handful of people who made it because, well, they're the ones we can see. We totally ignore the thousands, maybe millions, who followed the exact same blueprint and failed. The reality is that kind of wild, outlier success is almost always a mix of skill, hard work, and a huge dose of pure, dumb. But hold on, that doesn't mean this blueprint is useless. Not at all. The key is to stop worrying about the luck part and focus on what you can control. So here are 4 things you can start doing right now to build your own system. 1. Protect your mornings like they're sacred. 2. Master your focus using things like time blocking. 3. Learn to think from first principles. And 4. Stick with it. Be consistent. The research says it takes about 66 days to lock in a new habit so it becomes automatic. Look, at the end of the day, you can't control luck. You just can't. But you can absolutely control your habits, your focus, and how you think. You can choose to install your own high-performance operating system and dramatically increase your odds. The blueprint is right there. It's in your hands now. So the only question left is, what's your first move gonna be?